Today we're going to talk about root-strum. Now, when we learn our chords, we learn where the roots of those chords are. In other words, where the naming notes of the chords are. Because what we want to be able to do is strike the chord from its naming note in order to clearly define the chord, harmonically speaking. If we don't pay close attention to where the root of the chord is, we could end up with notes that don't belong in the chord. And that's a real problem because it'll just simply sound wrong. So when you're learning your chords, you're always learning the chord with the root or the naming note. In other words, you know where that is, and you're attacking the chord beginning at that root. For instance, in the case of a D chord, my root is on the 4th string. There's my root, and there's the chord. Now today what I'd like to take a look at is a technique that's called root-strum. What root-strum means is that we begin by attacking the root and then from there strum the chord. So root, strum, just as it says. In the case of a D chord, root, strum, back to root, strum. That root counts as one beat. So if I were counting in 4/4 time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, being now two measures, two complete measures of root-strum in 4/4 time. Now let's take that one step further and make some chord changes happen here. So let's move from the D chord to the 4 chord of G in the key of D. So D to G, and then back to D again, using the same technique, root-strum. In the case of a G chord, my root is going to be on the bottom string. There's my root, and then just simply drag the pick after you've played the root. Now, I mentioned something called drag. Take a look at my pick and notice that when I do a root-strum, the pick essentially just falls into the adjacent string, right? So I'm not trying to avoid the adjacent string by moving away from the guitar body, but instead I'm always moving into the guitar. So I just let the pick fall, and then drag the pick. So that way I'm not repeating the root, right? All right, so let's just move from a D chord root-strum, two measures, to a G chord root-strum, two measures, like so. Letting the pick fall. You get the idea. Let's add another chord, making this a 1-4-5 chord progression. So the 1 chord in the key of D is D, and the 4 chord in the key of D is G, and the 5 chord in the key of D is A. And the chord progression we'll use is 1 to 4, and then 1 to 5, or in other words, D to G, D to A, D to G, D to A, right? And you'll notice that as far as my left-hand fingering goes, I don't have to ever leave the fretboard with my 3rd finger. To the G chord, I keep the third finger in common. D chord, 3rd finger in common. A chord, guide with the 3rd finger, and then guide back to the D chord. So we're going to do root-strum and make this an 8 measure chord progression from D to G, then D to A. using that guide finger, guide back to D. Common finger. So very common chord progression, the 1-4-5 chord progression. And we say we're in the key of D because it starts and ends on D, essentially, where the tonality of it is in the key of D. Lots to remember here with the Root-Strum technique. Just always go for a relaxed position. Just let the pick fall, and then drag the pick from your position. And learn to count roots 1, 2, 3, 4. The root has to be 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so giving us 2 complete measures. The chord progression that we're using here is an 8-measure long chord progression, D to G, D to A, and just repeating that same thing. That's really good practice. And this is a technique that is leading to the eventual independence of a bass line and the chord notes themselves. So the idea is to start building some interest in the lower part.